Storey Time with Stephanie Storey.
Hi, welcome to Storey Time. I am art historical novelist Stephanie Storey, and I could not be more honored to have my guest here today because she is the author of something like over 20 best-selling novels, including a couple of New York Times best-selling novels you might have heard of, Before and Again, Sweet Salt Air. And her books have been translated into 25, 30 languages. There are 35 million of them in print. It's like this daunting, awesome career that I am in love with. So I could not be more excited to welcome my guest today. Her newest book is out this month, May 2020, A Week at the Shore. Welcome to the show, Barbara Delinsky.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's a delight to be here. And I'd like to meet the author you just introduced. She sounded pretty cool. Okay.
That's you.
Okay.
No, but okay, but now I'm going to start there because you have had this big, long career and you've put out all of these novels and you've put so many stories out into the world. Is this the career you envisioned having?
Oh my gosh, absolutely not. I mean, this is such a fluke of a career. It's amazing. In the first place, when I was growing up, women didn't have careers. Okay, it really is a different generation. And I mean, I got to college and discovered that women actually read the newspaper. And it wasn't that my dad was, I mean, my mom died when I was very young, but we'll touch on that later, I guess. But my dad just didn't think, women didn't do that. So anyway, when I graduated from college, I had the degree that I needed, which was an MRS degree, which was what we got at that point. I needed to work because my husband was just starting law school. So, and the amount of money that I was offered with my bachelor's degree was terrible, terrible. So I got a master's degree, started to work in the field of sociology, and then became pregnant. And my first child was born. I got involved in taking pictures of him, photography. Through that, I learned to write. Now, I didn't think it was going to be any kind of a career, but when I had two more children, and once they were getting off to kindergarten, they're twins. They are twins. I figured that I really should look for a job, and I did in my field, and nothing appealed. And then I read one morning an article in the newspaper about women who wrote the category romance, okay, which is very different from what I'm writing now, but which is what I kind of cut my teeth on as a writer. I went out, had never read one of these, and I went out and I read and loved a great deal of them. I read 30 or 40 of them in a 2-month period and took notes. No, but I took notes, I outlined, I figured out what, I wrote a book and then didn't know what to do with it. And I actually called one of the women who was profiled in a newspaper article that I read, and she was so wonderful, and she gave me suggestions of what to do. I sent stuff out to different publishers, and 6 weeks later got a call from one who wanted to buy the book. Now, was this still a career? No. My dad said to me, could be a fluke. My dad was a product of the Great Depression, so you understand that. But I was already halfway through my second book and having such a good time. But it wasn't probably until I was 7, 8 books in that I realized that I could this was a career for me. It was great.
I started to say, so you obviously really loved something about writing once you got into it, once you got into telling these stories. So how did you transition from really, really romance into, you write more today about sort of, you describe it, and I love the way I've read you describe it, which is everyday families facing not so everyday challenges. What did you love about writing? And then how did you transition into this sort of home where you were writing these kinds of stories?
Well, what I love about writing is that I can use my imagination and be paid for it. And more important, that people read my books and that the books mean something to those people. I mean, the letters I get from people are just amazing. I mean, at the beginning, it was snail mail, but now, I mean, we're talking through my website, we're talking through Instagram, through social, all kinds of notes. So I love connecting with readers through my writing. That is absolutely the best part. How did I transition? Well, increasingly, my romances got to be, a romance is this much romance and this much something else. Well, something else kept growing and growing and growing. And the romance was always there, but I started talking about other issues, which is really what I like to talk about, which is things that everyday people face, and no, I will not write about a pandemic. That's too close. And it's not an escape for me to write about a pandemic. I want to go to places I want to be, which is why I love the current book, the one that's just coming out, because we all want to be at the shore and we cannot necessarily be at the shore.
Mhm.
So, but I moved into mainstream simply by addressing the larger issues that I wanted to address. And there was always a love story in my book, but they ceased becoming romances so much as stories that are realistic. And let's face it, most people have some kind of love element in their lives, whether it is mother-daughter, lover, friendship kind of thing. It's, love is something that is part of our lives. So that just became put in perspective in my books.
Okay, before I ask you the 800 questions that are now flitting through my brain after that answer, let's talk a little bit about A Week at the Shore. So it's set at the Rhode Island shore, right? So you said earlier it's a place you wanted to go. What were you trying to explore in the Rhode Island shore? What attracted you to it?
Actually, it's a place that I wanted to go in my writing because I had not done it in my writing for many years. I've been writing New England for a long time because I realized that I've lived in New England all my life. Why would I want to set a book in Texas where you've got Texans who are writing books and they from there and set there, that they know that land much more than I do. So New England has been my thing. My family spends time on the Rhode Island shore. Most recently, my husband and I had a big wedding anniversary, and all of us, and I have 3 sons, each of whom has a wife and 3 kids. So there are 17 of us when we get together. We went to this one place on the Rhode Island shore, Watch Hill, Westerly. It's the same area that this book is set in. And we had just an amazing, amazing weekend. Now, for me to go back there in the writing of a book is a joy because I relive all of that feeling. I also think that the Rhode Island shore is a little bit understated and underappreciated. So I like to promote New England. It is ideal if you want to talk about a shore. I mean, there are quiet beaches, beautiful beaches. You get the whole New England feeling, which is rocky at times, coldish water. It doesn't get terribly hot. And then there are cute little towns that are right near the shore. So I wanted to take my readers there, which again gets back to the fact that really it's about what I do with my readers and the time we spend together.
Okay, so you've brought this up a couple of times at least about this connection to your readers. So at this point in your career, you've written a lot of stories. You've gone down a lot of different routes and a lot of different characters and a lot of different challenges. What drew you to this particular story, to Mallory, photographer, heading off to Rhode Island shore? Tell us a little encapsulation of your book and what you were hoping to give to readers with this latest story.
Well, let me start with how I got to the latest story, because that kind of fits in with what this latest story is. When I say I connect to my readers, really, I am my quintessential reader. What I like to read is what my readers like to read. What I like to read is what I like to write. What I like to write is what I can live with as a reader. I have experiences in my life, and my readers have similar kinds of experiences. So I had wanted to deal with, for many years, I've wanted to do this, and it took a while for me to feel that I was capable of doing it, or that I had the ideas formed in my mind. The concept of sisterhood, I have 2 sisters and actually grew up in a house of 5 girls. We have memories. And once a month, we have something called Cousins Lunch. In that house of 5 girls, there were my 2 sisters and I and 2 cousins, 5 of us. At Cousins Lunch, we often talk about the past, and we have such different memories of the exact same events. And that is what I wanted to write about, because I think that if I have this experience, my readers are going to have that experience too, and will be able to identify, maybe not in terms of the details of this particular or what my characters went through. Now, so getting to the story, I've got three sisters who've been estranged. Well, one of them has been in touch. One of them is the middle sister, obviously. I am a middle sister. Middle sisters are typically peacemakers. They are typically the ones who do not like conflict, who are the go-between, okay? So in my case, the older sister, the parents got divorced in a situation where, this was 20 years before the book opens, where there was a great tragedy that was never quite resolved. Mother goes off with the older daughter who follows her. Dad stays at the Rhode Island shore with the youngest daughter who adores him. And my character is kind of alone in New York City, which is where she lives for 20 years and where she decides to become a single mom. I mean, she does not know the dad's name. It's a number. It was a sperm bank, but she wanted to become a mother. And her sisters were actually fairly good in terms of they have periodic weekends. New York is neutral territory for them. So they have weekends which my character would sponsor. So they've seen each other in these 20 years, but suddenly things happen, especially with the dad. The mom has died, I think 10 years before the book opens. The dad is suddenly suffering a situation where his memory is not very good, and they need to know things from him that they would not otherwise know if they don't all come there and ask him. And they need to ask him now or it's going to be gone. I think that readers are going to identify with that kind of situation. Now, what happens, of course, to my main character is that once she gets there, I mean, I want to say all hell breaks loose, but it's very gradual, kind of a gradual unfolding where, you know, there's one little thing and another little thing, and we start to examine those memories, and then, you know, who was right and what do you remember? And oh my gosh, I don't remember it that way, but whoa, that makes total sense. So there's this whole other story that unfolds. And of course, there's a fabulous guy.
You said when you started to tell the plot, you started this with, I didn't know whether I was capable of doing this, whether I was ready to do it. Like, you seem to have a personal journey with telling this story and getting this story on the page. Can you tell me a little bit about what that was?
Is well, you know, I've actually written, all told, and published 83 books. And the number 83, because I've been doing this full time for more than 40 years. And if you work full time at it, you get a lot of books done. And I've been lucky enough that publishers keep buying me. The number 20 is the number that have hit the New York Times and other lists. So, you know, I've been very, very fortunate with that. Every time I sit down to start a new book, I'm convinced I can't do it. And I actually think it's quite a good thing because it keeps me on my toes. It makes me work harder. And I have, every book I start, every new book, I want it to be better than the last one. So that is really, when I deal with an issue, a topic that is very tough for me, it's very much a challenge. But if you don't challenge yourself, you write the same book over and over and over again. And I never want to do that. It's really a struggle when you've written as many books as I have to write a different book every time. I had not written about sisters with their memories and as the focus in the book. You know, there may have been other books that I've written with sisters in them and sibling rivalry, and maybe they do remember on occasion something differently, but to make it the core of the book, I think, is something else. I wasn't sure I could do it because I am always not sure I can do it. I'm not sure until 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way through the book that I'm going to be able to get it done.
I'm glad to know that 80 books in, that's still the case, because I'm only on the first 2, and I'm still like, what? I can't do this again. So I'm glad to know that's normal.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, please, I'm using the pandemic as an excuse, you know, not to have to write a little bit, oh, this is just stressful. I'll just let it go a little. Well, I also, with a new book coming out, there's a lot of preparation that has to be done for that. So I'm spending time on that. But
okay, but speaking of the pandemic, you said you're not going to write about it, which I get. Like I write historical, so I'm going to be writing about this pandemic anyway. But obviously, it has changed my perspective on a lot of things that I write about. Are you thinking about how it's changing your perspective on relationships? And I mean, you write about ordinary people overcoming sort of not so everyday challenges. This is a not so everyday challenge. So how is this affecting the way you're thinking about these issues, and that you are going to write about them again once we are through to the other side of all this?
yes. Well, I think what's happened is that it has solidified a belief that I've always had, but something that I will now deal with even more, I think, in my books, and that is the importance of family and the importance of communication. That's always been something that I've talked about. What I've seen during this pandemic, it's not that I've seen great numbers of people, because obviously I'm stuck in my house like everybody else is, but my family, in some ways, and friends, we've all become closer because we've needed to support each other. In terms of my sons, their kids range in age from 3 to 16. And I've seen within each of their families, there's a closeness that has evolved. And it's a closeness that is kind of like, or has many of the same attributes to the closeness that I grew up with. We didn't have devices. I started writing before I even had computers. I mean, my first books I wrote out by hand and then typed up on my college typewriter at night. We didn't have the internet. I used to do research at the library. My kids, my grandkids have devices. Okay, there's this, I shudder to think what their thumbs will be like in 10 years. But now they're suddenly finding that, whoa, we sit at the dinner table because we're all here. We don't have to rush to soccer or lacrosse. We can't go there. We're talking. We're closer. We're doing a jigsaw puzzle, or we're getting up and sitting and talking about our classes more than they are all doing remote learning. So it's not a question of not having school, but it's been really something to see the closeness develop. And it's something that I think our kids, my kids' kids, were so busy and programmed and weren't able necessarily to focus on that, to take the time. So things have slowed down. This is a theme I'm sure that I will put into my books because I think it's important. And it's a message that I want to send. I mean, I feel there are several times in the course of my career when I felt that I had a platform. And I actually have to tell you, my husband and I needed to get out of the house today. I mean, we just wanted to get out and do something. We live outside of Boston, so we drove to Concord. And among other things, we went to the Alcott House, where I think they actually did some filming for Little Women there. In the front, there is a picture of Louisa May Alcott, a big sign, and she's wearing a mask. And it said, the sign says, "What would Louisa do? LWLD." And I put my mask on, of course, and had my husband take a picture. I think I'll post it tomorrow morning. But it's there. I mean, that's a message that I can give to my readers. Nobody else was around, but we're wearing masks. It's something that I believe in. So I give that kind of message. And the message in terms of what message I've gotten from this pandemic is that we need to be with each other, because that is devastating. If not, I mean, if you're totally alone, it's very difficult. And the character I'm writing now, for example, in my next book, which will probably come out in 2 years, she is alone because she's always been very, very independent and very able. And it's kind of the thing that she is able to, her kids, I mean, she's able to say, okay, you can take care of it. You can take care of it. You can. Well, as a result, they all need her, but they don't consider necessarily that she needs them. And she's not sure she does. She has to come to the realization that she needs them. So this is something that was already in the works before we even had this pandemic.
Now, you've talked a lot about during this last little bit particularly, but also just this book in general is all about family and the father dying. And your mother obviously died when you were, not obviously, but I know that your mother died when you were young. How did that impact? I guess I want to know, I'm certain it impacted a lot of things in your life, but I guess I want to know primarily how it impacted the things you write about, and how you incorporate some of that knowledge. You know, my mother's still alive. I'm lucky she's still here. But how you incorporate some of that knowledge into your books to help the rest of us understand it, or understand loss, or I don't know. I just threw out a lot of things, wherever you want to take that.
Well, it really, no, you're good here. My mother's death was probably the single most important thing to happen to me in my life in terms of having repercussions in my later life. For one thing, because I didn't have a mother, I became much more independent. And I do swear that I would not have even attempted to write that very first book if I wasn't the independent kind of person that I am, and if I had had a mother to lean on. Now, most of the stories I write, there is that kind of relationship where we've got not totally dependent daughters, but I write about mothers and daughters all the time. I write about mothers who are alive, but who are toward the end of their life. I mean, one of my earliest books for my daughters is about a mother who has something she needs to tell her kids, and she's not in good health. And her grown daughters, she's got 3 daughters. I mean, here's, life, art imitates life. But she needs to tell them something about herself to explain why she was the kind of mother she was. So there's that story. There's the story in A Week at the Shore, where we've got a mother who had 3 daughters. I love that number 3. It's very good. But a mother who they didn't quite understand totally, and certainly didn't know things about. Now, I mean, I have to guess what my relationship with my mother would have been like, but I've written any number of books that guess at it and that explore. So I, in some ways, experience having a mother as an adult. I experience it through my characters. And I'm going to assume that my readers are going to identify with one plot or another like that.
That's a gift in a lot of ways, isn't it? To be able to experience a mother-daughter relationship
Yes.
through your writing, something that you met. That's amazing.
Well, but they say that writing is therapeutic, and certainly when you write a memoir, you're working through things. So maybe that's kind of what I'm doing in my books. I am living that mother-daughter relationship. I mean, you mentioned Before and Again, which came out 2 years ago. There's a wonderful mother-daughter issue in that. And I very much put myself there. I mean, I wished I had that kind of, I would like to think I had some of those things with my mother had she lived. But so I think that my characters get the benefit of my not having had a mother and wanting to, and being able to imagine what it might have been like, and then to solve problems. That's the beautiful thing about writing, especially if you write books like mine, which I don't wrap up every single little end, but I do like to have a relatively happy ending. And I think that, from that point of view, sometimes daughters and mothers, I have friends who are my age, whose mothers are still alive, and it's not all joy. I mean, it's a problem sometimes, so with mine, usually there is some kind of resolution, some kind of understanding, because that's what I personally want.
Okay, you brought up something earlier that I want to go back and get, because I hadn't thought about this until you brought up Louisa May Alcott, which is, of course, like some of the most famous sisters in all of literary history, right? And we just had the new Greta Gerwig version out. But did you, when you were sort of crafting this sister story, aside from drawing on your own, did you ever think about how it compared to other literary sister stories? Did that ever sort of cross your mind? Did you ever play with that idea? I'm just curious.
No. Okay. So I'm going to make a confession to you, which will probably endear me to a lot of readers, or maybe it will make me an enemy of the reader. I don't know. Um, I was not all that well read growing up. I was not that interested in English. I went to a very fine public high school, and I was in advanced placement English my junior year, I think it was, and was asked to leave because I couldn't keep up. Now, we read all the standard stuff. We read Shakespeare. Did we read a lot of the classics? I don't know. When I got to college, I did not take courses in English other than the one course I had to take to get the requirement out of the way the first year. I was a psychology major. And to me, to tell you the truth, Stephanie, psychology has informed my work far more than literature. But it's only now that I am starting to go back to, and not all that often, I like to read books that have just come out. Because I want to see what other people are doing right now that maybe can, inspire me. But something like, Little Women, I mean, that's certainly, you're right. I mean, the whole sister story there was just remarkable. I wish I could say that those kinds of things that I think about great literature when I'm crafting a story, but I don't. I'm always thinking to the future, either thinking of what's out right now or thinking what my readers are going to want to read about in 2 years.
Oh, I don't think it's something you should want or not want. You brought it up and I thought, well, I wonder if there's a connection there. But now I do have to ask about, what do you think the study of psychology is? I love the study of psychology. I find it fascinating. I took a couple classes in it in college, but sometimes I like to read about it because I do think there's so much of noveling that you have to get caught up in the internal life and the psychology of your characters. What did that give you in college? How does that inform your writing?
Okay. I think only for me, one way. And that is that I realized that psychology was important in life, that it had a role in life. Okay. Do I remember the courses I took? No. I think that I gravitated towards psychology because I loved interpersonal relationships. It wasn't that psychology got me going on personal relationships. It was that this was what I was good at. When I was a kid, the happiest times of my life were summers. I went to a summer camp. It was an overnight camp, 8 weeks, not the 2 or 4. It was 8 long weeks. And I had I had an amazing group of friends. The girls there were unbelievable. They were from all over the country. The camp was in Maine, and it was a kind of thing that at the end of the 8 weeks, we cried our hearts out leaving because we wouldn't see each other till the next summer. Went there for 7 years. One other friend and I were the 2 confidants of everybody else. And it's only when I started studying psychology that I realized, goodness, I had been giving therapy to some of these other kids. And it's kind of what I do with friends. If I ask questions or people who I'm working with, I mean, I cannot tell you, even my hairdresser, I advise him on things in relationships, because it fascinates me. Interpersonal relationships do. And it's a gift that I have. That is my gift more than anything, is sensing. It's not my prose is not the most beautiful in the world. And sometimes readers can find fault with pacing or anything else, but it's that I capture that human heart.
Do you think your books are therapy for your readers? Like, did they get some sort of own emotional growth? That's what I keep hearing from you, that
Yes.
you're trying to help your readers work through things.
Yes, absolutely. I get letters from readers to that effect. Letters, email, whatever you want to say. There are ones who tell me that with every book, you help me work through an issue that I had. Now, I am sure that after A Week at the Shore comes out, there are going to be readers who will say, wow, I was estranged from one of my sisters, and because I've had this before, I've done this before, sisters who've been estranged for different reasons, but my book may inspire people to try to connect again, because the bottom line is that it's important. Connecting is very important, and you don't have to be best of friends, but sisters share something that you don't share with other people. So readers write to me and tell me this. One reader, I had a book called The Summer I Dared. And it was about a woman who had been, was going to spend the summer on an island off the coast of Maine. And she went on a ferry from the mainland, and there was a horrific accident. 3 people survived that accident, who she and 2 others, and they kept in touch, and they really kind of worked, they gave each other therapy in many regards. I got, one of the problems that my character had was she was running away from a very unhappy marriage. That book, and it was the summer I dared to say, this marriage is not right. You know, that's what the message was of that book, the end of that book. I have readers, more than one, who wrote to me and said, thank you so much for writing this. You gave me the courage to get out of a bad relationship. Or people who will say, you wrote my story, and that made me feel so good because I feel less alone. So yeah, I do think there's a therapeutic value in fiction.
The number of times you referenced during this conversation helping your readers and connecting to your readers is a really honestly lovely thing. I don't hear that from every writer, and I have such a love and appreciation for that. So
well, thank you. I don't know why. I mean, my readers have made my career, you know, and they are the other half. One half of my career is writing a book. The other half is pleasing readers and getting feedback from them and knowing that they look forward to book after book after book. So I don't understand writers who don't feel that way, but maybe they just are working on a different way. And as I said way at the beginning, I did not set off to be a writer. So maybe that's another thing, you know, that helps me. Simply, for me, it's always been about the give and take with readers.
Right. Oh, this is beautiful. This has been a beautiful conversation, Barbara Delinsky. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie,
for joining me today and for writing this beautiful book, A Week at the Shore. I'm hoping everybody reads it and everybody gets to escape to the shore, even though we may not be able to escape to the shore this year.
I know. Let's keep our fingers crossed, but they can do it virtually by reading the book, certainly. So that's what I couldn't, you know, when we came up with the title and the cover, by the way, is based on one of my own photographs, because that I took in this place in Rhode Island that I had mentioned to you. When I wrote the book and when we came up with the cover, we had no clue that this was going to happen. And it could not have been a more enticing cover or title for what's going on in our lives right now, because who would not want to spend a week at the shore?
Story time with Stephanie Storey. Story time virtually. We've got time